Welcome. You know, we've had a great summit this year. Everybody has had a really great time. Who's had a good time? Yeah, me too. I think we've had we, I'm surprised at the turnout. I just want to take a few minutes before we break off into some of the other groups that we have and show you a demo of Cycle.Host. So a lot of people are coming to me and saying, what is Cycle.Host? What does it do? Now, I know a lot of you have already seen it. A lot of you already use it, but there are a lot of you out there that have never used Cycle.Host. So let's run through a very quick demo. First and foremost, what is Cycle.Host? Well, quite frankly, it is the automation of best practice in the cloud hosting market. So when you think of cloud development, you think of a number of different products. And all of those different products are designed to be integrated together so that you can achieve success as a software developer. Well, Cycle.Host actually combines all of that into one very easily managed package that hosts the entire development cycle, hence the name Cycle.Host. That's the purpose of it, is to host the entire development cycle. So let's look at this. Let's take just a few minutes. Now, this is going to be a very brief overview. This is basically like skipping a rock across the pond. We're just going to very lightly touch in certain areas. Obviously, you all know that who have used Cycle.Host know of the advanced features of the Cycle.Host cloud platform, and so you understand that there is a lot below the surface of this pond. But we're just going to skim across the top. I just want to show you some of the most powerful parts of this because and while I do, anybody who has never used Cycle.Host before, I want you to think about your current process. What do you currently do and how do you currently develop software? Especially in the case where you have a new idea, a new product, and you want to just put it out there to the world. Okay. While you think of that, what your process currently is, let's go ahead and get started. Now, Cycle.Host, the entire Cycle.Host platform is built around the idea of an environment. And the environment is something that you can have multiple environments, and they can be as small as you want. You can have a very small environment that hosts nothing but just serves up a static web page, or maybe a WordPress or a Drupal site or something a little bit more advanced, something but very static. Or you could have a full-scale cluster with multiple nodes and the processing power of, I mean, you can add as much as you want to create this entire enterprise level solution. So it's up to you, and I'll show you exactly how that's done. Let's start with our first environment. Now, environments are actually done by domain name. So we're going to, this makes it very easy to create domains, create environments that are online within seconds. See, the idea behind Cycle.Host is that there's not a ton of configuration that you have to do in order to get this to work. You're going to see in just a minute, we're going to have a working environment ready to go in a matter of minutes. So first, we're going to actually purchase a domain. We're just going to do a 1 year. We can set our administrative and technical. All of this stuff looks good. This is terms and conditions, things like that. This is all stuff that's, we're basically just registering a domain name for our environment. And there we have it. We have our domain. We can actually select that. This is where you can see we have a few different things that we can actually show here. One is the website hosting, and then our cloud enterprise solution. Website hosting, basic, host your website, and then your cloud enterprise is more of a, you have a you can have nodes and clusters and automatic load balancing and all of this. We'll go over all that a little bit later in some of the other breakout sessions. For the scope of this demo, just this very brief overview, um, we'll just very lightly touch on the idea of multiple nodes. You can set custom environments. You can set a whole range of different templates. This is a way for you to easily say, okay, I just want a simple Node.js environment, and we're going to start with that. Now, what do you get with this? Well, you get a full load balanced disaster recovery built-in environment. Now, look, we can see here that our environment is set up. Notice the black bar. What is the black bar? Well, the black bar is showing that it's offline. So you're going to see something change here. Now it changes to green. So that's an indication that this environment has been set up. What just happened behind the scenes? What happened behind the scenes is your entire environment was set up that fast. Your entire environment is now running, ready to go, and ready for whatever you can throw at it. Now, when I say ready to go, I don't mean it's just available to the outside world. I mean it's available to not just the internet through that domain name. And granted, yes, for security purposes, you don't always have to be out on the internet and live. You can easily configure Cycle.Host to work inside your internal network, in your internal DNS, or there are a wide range of ways that you can configure this. But for the scope of this, we're just going to throw it out there on the internet. So our environment's running, and it's ready to be, it's ready. Now, it's also behind the scenes connected with a brand new Git source code repository, and it is fully connected. Now, what does that mean, fully connected? Well, that means that this is driven by that source code repository. And of course, you can use remote source code repositories if you want to use a repository that you already have. You can obviously configure it to do that. But in this case, we just started with a brand new one. So that's the important part of this, is to be able to say, hey, look, what is the purpose of me wanting to create software? Well, the purpose is we want to be able to innovate and create. That's what we want to do. We want to innovate and create for our end clients. So let's look at our deployment here. First, obviously, it's going to lock down with basic authentication for your very first environment. And I'll show you this a little bit later. This is by default, so that you're not creating environments that are just 100% accessible. We try to lock it down a little bit, but let's go ahead and cancel this. This is the username and password up to this is just your Cycle.Host username and password. And so anyone with access to this environment can get in. And I'll show you that in just a minute, because you can invite as many people as you want to be a part of your environment, and be contributors to this environment. And by default, they will have a login to this. But let's go in here, and just for the purpose of this quick demo, let's just turn our basic authentication off. And now it's turned off. There are a few other options here that we'll go over later. Secure certificates. You can easily just one click and you are secure and have your certificate in place. But let's deploy this, and now you can see that here we are. no basic authentication anymore. We turned it off. It is, here we are with the domain name, and everything is running and ready to go. And this is what I was talking about with nodes. Here's our load. It's still doing some processing here, but we only have one node right now, but we can add as many as we want. And nodes are basically just copies of your environment that span across multiple data centers that are load balanced, and you could have half your nodes go out and none of your clients will even know about it, because because you're managing that load, and you're managing your cluster and the nodes within that cluster. But we won't add any more nodes at this time. Let's move into what I want to show you, and that is the agile principles behind this. So we have an environment, we have it running in the main on the internet, and this is basically your master environment. Now, we talked about best practice. Now, it is not best practice to commit to your master repository. So Cycle.Host actually doesn't allow you to do that. You can't. So given the repository that we have created behind the scenes right here, you can't commit to your master repository as far as within Git. So what do? We want to be able to create functionality and to innovate. That's the whole purpose of Cycle.Host, to allow us to do all that configuration so that you can focus on innovation. So let's innovate. But how do we get code out to our main environment? Through a release. So let's look at, we'll leave this up. Let's look at creating a new release. Now, if we go to our actual team board, we can add a release here. And this is very simple. We're just going to set this to the end of the, version numbers are very important. Remember, a release has to have a version number. That's how releases and branches are tagged. Very important, so that Cycle.Host lets you easily just revert back to any tag you want. Now, I want to bring this up, the path to production. Very important. Okay, this is the path to production. This is what's the path to get my functionality into production. Right now, this release, R1 1.0 version, is the last stop before release. Okay, now we've branched this release. This is an actual branch, and we see it right here. Okay, so we have our release branched. What does that mean? That means that is basically, if you've ever done an integration branch or a UAT branch, it's basically your last stop before you move into your production environment. All right, moving quickly. And again, I hate to be moving so quickly, but because there is a lot of information here. But we're going to move into a sprint. What is a sprint? We're going to set this to release 1. A sprint is basically a iteration of work. So how much work can we get done in the next 2 or 3 weeks? And you can set the dates on that, and you can do you can basically have configure that however you want. But we've created this release, and it's actually, and you can see in the path to production that this sprint, we've created this sprint, and you can see in the path to production that you have your sprint, you have your release, it moves up through R1. So any functionality that you want to pass in through this sprint is going to have to go through the sprint, through the release, and through the and then out to production. Each one of these points that you see in the path to production is going to have to be verified, and you will see the power behind that in just a minute. We don't want garbage being released into our production environment, and so that's a very important part of this. All right, so we're going to actually branch this sprint. The sprint becomes a new branch from the release that basically allows you to keep that path to production into place. Now, if you've ever had a development branch or a Well, a development branch, really. If you've ever had a development branch, that's what this is. The sprint is going to be your development branch, and then your release is your integration or your UAT branch. But we're just going to call it your sprint and release because it was easier just to follow the agile principles. Now, let's create, and we're going very quickly through this. Let's create one story. And a story is a slice of functionality, okay? So we have story one, a slice of functionality. We're going to set this as a feature. You could do an epic, bug, spike, hotfix. All of them have different ways of doing things, and different easily doing different things. So now you can see that for our sprint, and you could even set these stories on the backlog and not assign by just not assigning them to a release, and then they would go to the backlog. But for right now, we created it, we assigned it to the release, we assigned it to the sprint, so now it's on our team board. And now we have, it's a feature, and I assigned it to the user that I'm using currently, and it's not in progress, but again, you can branch the story. Now, this seems like a lot of branches, right? Because every story is its own branch. Now, you'll see that over time, as you're actually working with these stories and you're working, and each developer is working, think of a story like a sandbox branch. Every developer is working on their own functionality without impacting other functionality. So you can see through the path to production that you created this story, and now you have a sprint. It has to go up through that sprint, and then from the sprint, that functionality has to go into the release, and then from the release, that has to go into production. That's the path to production. Now, one of the very powerful things of Cycle.Host is instant continuous integration and continuous deployment. All right. When I branched all of these, you notice that a deploy button showed up here. This deploy button allows you to deploy the release separate from any other environment. You can instantly deploy that release. Same thing with the sprint. Let's move back over to this sprint and deploy it. And you can see at any time, anyone can fire up the environments for the story, the sprint, the release, and even the story. And all of it is controlled by subdomain, by branch name. See? So the subdomain showing that this is the release, this is the sprint, and this is the story. All of the environments that we just deployed are all working completely independent of each other. So any functionality that goes into the story has no bearing on the sprint, on any other story, or the sprint or the release yet. So let's work through the workflow just a little bit. First, a story has to have a task. So we're going to assign that to me. Well, let's just set that to in progress and see what happens. The other thing a story has to have is a list of acceptance. It has to. We can put a description in here for it. You can list as many acceptance as you need in order for this functionality to be verified. Acceptance is what do I need to do to get this story to a completed status. Now the story was automatically moved into in progress because the task was set to in progress. Now you're going to notice here that developers don't move their stories around from lane to lane. What moves the story is actually completing the work. So if you have a story that's in progress, then what will move it to testing? Well, what moves it to testing is completing all of the tasks. Once all of the tasks are complete, the story will automatically move to testing. If a task is reopened, it will go back into in progress. Now, testing. This is where it is extremely powerful, where Cycle.Host really is very powerful. With testing, you can open up a story, and anyone who wants to test this can deploy it and see changes instantly without having to pin branches or a tester doesn't have to run it locally or things like that. They can just instantly fire up a story and see the functionality. Now let's go ahead and put some functionality in here. Before we do that though, we have to actually hook into our new repository that we created using our keys. So we are going to specify a key that we can use to clone our repository. So this is a Windows machine. Obviously, a lot of people like to use Git command line and things like that. Perfectly acceptable. Pretty much any Git tool will work here. And will allow you to function use all of the Git functionality. So I am getting this key. All right. And I apologize. I know you can't see this part. I like to keep my keys off the screen. All right. Now, new key. We'll go ahead and paste that in. This is going to allow us to be able to clone our repository. So if we go back to our settings, we can just copy the URL here. And like I said, I use a lot of, you can use anything you would want to actually, as far as a Git system. For Windows, I'm just going to use our regular Tortoise Git, which is a tried and tested and true. And so here we are with our empty folder. We're going to clone our repository. I already copied the URL for the Git repository. It'll be creating a new directory. We're going to load the key that I just put in here. And we've cloned our repository. So we basically just connected our local system to our Cycle.Host system. Let's go in here. We have a file here, and we are going to open this up with just let's just use our Notepad++. I have a lot open here. This is that blue screen that we just saw. Okay, so this is the code associated with that blue screen that we just saw. It's basically just an iframe with a it has nothing on it. It's an iframe that points to a news feed that we have on our local Cycle.Host system. So let's go ahead and change the body of the body. I wish we could really go into some detail on the source, because we have some amazing things, but we'll put this as story 1, and for the demo, just very quickly. All right, so if we go ahead, and obviously we can't commit to master, as I told you before. So what we need to do is actually fetch all of the everything that we need for, we already have all these branches. So let's go ahead and switch over to the branch that we are using. And we will switch to our story branch. And there we go. And now we'll be able to commit our changes for index into that story. All right. We will push this out to our story branch. And there we have it. So let's go back to that story and see in the testing phase because we pushed code out to that story, we have a new tab. That tab is called the code review. This is basically the view of what has changed in the story. This is this is ours. This is the branch we're using. This is the sprint. So what has actually changed? First, we tested it. We can actually deploy this. Let's deploy this story and pretend like we're testing. So if we deploy that, you can see the changes have gone in for the demo. This is story 1. These are the changes that have taken place. So we are now going to verify that both of the acceptance were accepted, everything's working, and we're now into our code review state. Now, before I move on, I want to actually just show you how the sprint itself hasn't been touched. That environment, the sprint environment, is still working exactly the way that we set that up to work. All right, let's go back to our code review of our story. And now we have a view that allows us to not only see the code, but verify it. This is the team, and the entire team shows up of who you have working on this story. And we can accept the changes, and it shows that we've accepted. And even on the team board, it shows that we have accepted. I've reviewed and approved this story. So that as a developer, you can look down through the list of stories and know exactly what you've already reviewed and what you've already accepted, so that you can take care of these. That's basically what you saw is basically your PR. That is the PR, but it's contained within the story. That's a very important part of Cycle.Host, is that the story is the slice of functionality that is self-contained with everything it needs for you to move it from environment to environment. There is no, this is another thing that's very important, and this is a big one because people love this. All the code has been checked in for this. It has been tested and it has been reviewed. If I checked in more code on this right now, what do you think happens to that story? Well, the story moves into in progress because you just had code checked into it. All of the acceptance have clear out automatically, and all of the reviews clear out. Because code was checked in, it automatically has to be retested and re-reviewed. And that's the kind of stuff that Cycle.Host does really well with, so that no one is left in the dark as to what is actually being pushed into production. All right, so our story is now ready for release, which means there is a button that allows us to merge. We're going to merge this story into this sprint, and we're going to basically move this story up through the path to production. The story is done. There is nothing you can do with it now. The story's done. And our burn down updated, our velocity updated. We're now 100% complete on our sprint. We've completed 3 points. We have 7 days left. You can see the sprint has changes. But what changes? Well, let's deploy it and see. Oh, it has the changes from the story. So at this point, the sprint has to be verified. So you may have a lot of stories for a single sprint. And this acceptance criteria view on the sprint will show every acceptance of every story that's been merged into that sprint. So the tester will have to go down through every single acceptance of every single story. Because, yes, a story's been tested, but has the story been tested together? Have all the stories been tested together? That's what the sprint is there for, the development branch, if you will. So you can test all of the stories combined. Now, let's go back in. We've accepted it all, and now we have our code review. Yes, every single story has been reviewed and accepted, but separately. Now, this view will actually show the differences of the sprint to the release, which means all of the stories combined. What are the changes of all the stories combined? I'm going to accept that more than half the team has to in order for the sprint to be labeled as being able to merge. And now we're going to move this sprint up into, because the acceptance has been accepted of every story that has been promoted, and all of the code has been reviewed together. So we're going to merge that into our release. And now our sprint's been cleared, but our release is showing that we have changes over here. Okay, what changes? Well, the release is your last stop. So we have the changes in the release. Our main environment over here, our production environment, is still completely clean. But we have this last stop to make before we actually push our functionality into our production environment. So we are going to release. At this point, we need to go through acceptance again. Why? Because we may have multiple sprints per release, all right? And because you basically need to be able to show that this release is good. So with multiple sprints per release and multiple stories per sprint, we actually are showing the acceptance of every single piece of functionality that has been accepted into this release. We've accepted all of it. It's your last test before moving into production. You have to make sure it's good. We are done moving garbage into your production environment. All right. You're now going to review all of the code of every story, of every sprint. And at that point, what do we show? The release itself is now ready to move into our production environment. And because every acceptance has been accepted, every piece of code has been reviewed, and everything is ready to move. The release has been cleared, and now if we actually see from our production environment, it now has all of the changes. So this seems like a lot of checking, but in reality, what it's following, you imagine having 7 to 10 developers or multiple Scrum teams all working in one environment, and that's when things start getting, it's very important for you to start looking at it not from a code perspective, but from a story or a functionality perspective. See, the power behind Cycle.Host is this. We move functionality into production. Working, tested functionality into your production environment, not code. See, the days of pushing code are over. The days of moving functionality, working, tested into your environment that's where those days are on us right now. That's where Cycle.Host excels. So when we look at this from the standpoint of even test automation, think of you can actually hook this in with an automated test framework that allows you to put an automated test on every single acceptance, so that your tests have to all be passing and be green before it's even able to merge. What do you get in the end? 100% code coverage. on your tests. That's what you get, as if a unit or functional, because every single acceptance of every single story is automatically tested. So you're actually producing better quality code. See, and that's it. That's the demo. That's showing what Cycle.Host actually is and what it can do. The power is there. Um, the power is for us to actually look at saying, um, let's stop taking all of the amazing number of third-party applications and stringing them together to create a cloud environment. Okay? And think about, like I said at the very beginning of this demo, think about what you've done in the past for your development. How long does it take you to get all of that strung together? All of your agile management software, all of your Git repositories, your cloud hosting, your servers, all of that to where you can actually do what we did in 30 minutes? Well, I've seen as long as 2 weeks. 3 weeks. I've seen months of people getting stuff in place that Cycle.Host can do in minutes. So that the idea is, let's take all of that functionality of putting together all of those third-party applications that we have today. Let us take all of that from you, so that you can focus all of the resources of your team on what matters most to you. And what matters most to you is innovation, and not the integration of your environment. So that's our motto: innovation, not integration. All right, thank you. And let's redefine our definition of done.